just a couple of days ago, so when we're in the town and when we're going around, please don't fan out in every direction. Closer the better. Don't be shy. I'm Garry Adelman.
I'm Tim Smith.
And we're going to be going around today here at Harpers Ferry and at Antietam. The Antietam part is part 2. To get into some of the specifics of it, we're going to start right here. We're going to walk around on this hill for a while. One of the most photographed hills of the Civil War. Far more photos taken on this hill than at Little Round Top at Gettysburg. So chew on that for a little while. We're in fact standing near the top of this hill right now. The big building on top of the hill with the center arrow, as far as I remember, is part of the building. We're standing right near here, okay? There's at least 35 photos taken on this hill itself, again, known as Camp Hill. We're gonna start up here. We're gonna walk over to near where we registered. We're then gonna walk down the hill toward a cool old cemetery. We're then going to walk all the way down the heights into the lower town, stopping at Jefferson's Rock on the way, and then seeing some sights in the lower town. As soon as we get down into the lower town, we're going to have a bathroom break. We'll regather after 6.5 minutes. That's all the time you'll have. And then we're going to walk down through the lower town, out to some more cool buildings, out to the confluence of the Potomac and the Shenandoah, before turning around, coming back, if we have time, seeing the best overlook at Harpers Ferry over at a place called the Hilltop House before we break, hopefully before 12:15, and then we'll have 70, 80 minutes to transfer up to Antietam, where we'll park at Burnside Bridge. At Burnside Bridge, there is an overflow parking lot. There's only about 15 spots there, but if you drive straight on the right, you can access the overflow spot, okay? There is construction at Burnside Bridge, unless they just cleaned it up today, which means that only one way at a time goes up and down the hill. So be patient with that, allow a little bit of extra time. You can grab lunch in the lower town if you'd like. You can, in fact, bag off if you'd like at this point. This is a hard tour. This is more elevation than we've done on any of our tours before. Who hasn't been to Harpers Ferry before right now? All right. This is some hilly terrain, okay? Going down won't be too hard, but we're talking about at least 90 steps just to get down from Jefferson's Rock, from the cemetery down to the lower town, okay? And they're pretty precipitous as well, okay? Look it up. And then you got to get back up to your car. If you're someone that finds, ooh, maybe this is a big mistake, turn around the cemetery and come back to your car and try to find a way down there, but it's almost impossible to park, okay? So you might want to bag off at that point, okay? Some of you might want to check out Harpers Ferry the rest of the day. You're welcome to do that. You've already paid. I'm sorry, you've already made your donation, okay? Let's see. Now, as always, and by the way, when we go to Antietam, we're going to go down to Burnside Bridge and then follow some of Burnside's tracks, namely Wilcox's Union Division, Orlando B. Wilcox's Division, towards some of the places on the battlefield. No one ever goes. Everybody just drives by them and usually doesn't stop by any of those places. We're going to enjoy that as well. We have something special planned while we're there, so special property access if it all works out. And then depending on how close the massive storm that is brewing and moving through like Mississippi and Alabama right now, it's moving fast, depending on that, we'll spend more time like on the route or a little bit less. I mean, if the hail's like about to come and we're trapped in the middle of nowhere. So we're cognizant of that, okay? It's a non-issue for now, okay? Questions? Alrighty then. We always have some prizes to give away. We have some prizes at Harpers Ferry. We have some prizes at Antietam. And this one isn't a quiz yet, but here's the deal. For a copy of 99 Historic Photos of Harpers Ferry by me and John J. Richter, this one's going to go to the first person who is certainly going to ask a question sometime today. I have one in my mind. I know you're going to ask it. And that person gets this, okay? Usually we're not so obtuse. Now, we have other prizes as well. The types of questions could be anything. They could be about movies or they could be about middle names, which I love. For instance, the Union commander in here, what's his name during 1862? Anyone know? Miles. Dixon Miles. Anyone know? This isn't for a prize. Anyone know Dixon S. Miles' middle name? It's not Millhouse. What? Standish? Oh, close. Stansbury. If only that was for a prize, I'd have given it to you. But for a prize, for a copy of Dean Thomas's The Gettysburg Cyclorama, before it was restored, so it doesn't look quite as good as it does now, who could tell me the middle name of the commander of the 28th Pennsylvania, John Garry?
W.
W. Who said white? Well done. He who wanted to hide his name now gets it. So there's the first prize. You'll see we love to give out prizes early, especially the heavier ones, so we don't have to carry him the whole way. Of course, a good portion of your proceeds go to the American Battlefield Trust. Thank you, and thank you to John O'Donnell for setting all this up. I see a lot of trust members here. All right. And that's John and John over there who are working hard on all this stuff. These things don't just happen, so thanks to them. The trust has preserved more than 500 acres of land here at Harpers Ferry, most of it on Bolivar Heights, okay? Maryland Heights, Loudon Heights, Bolivar Heights, Camp Hill, okay? And you'll learn a lot more about these as you go along. Now, one thing, because we've done a lot of tours, we usually do these tours at Gettysburg, and you all ask a lot of questions, and we can answer 95% of them probably, and there's a few we can't. And when we can answer them, we can usually go 3 levels deep. That ain't this tour. Okay, we don't know nearly as much about it, so hopefully that'll keep us moving faster, because we don't have as much to say, except never underestimate Tim when he starts talking about local people. I call local crap. Lastly, this always happens on a tour. You know, some people walk faster than others. If you're one of the people that doesn't walk so fast, you might want to try to anticipate when we're going to move and start moving, so you're not that person that just catches up to the group in time for us to move again. You don't hear anything, and then it happens again and again. You've seen it happen before, so keep that in mind. And lastly, before we actually start, remember that we're back to Gettysburg on October 6th for an all-new fishhook hike. We're going to do it in a different order and try to see more things, and that's the real deal. Somehow the Union line's only 4 miles long, or four-ish, but somehow the hike is like 9 or 10. So keep that in mind and be ready for Sunday, October 6th. Okay? Anything I missed?
Nope, I think we're ready.
All right, good. Don't worry, Tim's going to get going soon, so I'm just going to keep the floor for now. So like I said, we're on top of Camp Hill. I already showed you this picture. You can see certain buildings, and using those buildings and Loudon Heights, which you can see right in front of me there, you can line up these photos, okay? So we know where we're standing. Almost all the photos taken on Camp Hill, if not all, during the Civil War, were taken in August of 1862 by Matthew Brady and his crew, photographing the 22nd New York State Militia. All these photos, and by the way, just about all of you, unless you came from town, passed by this church that you can see in here on the way up here. It's right on Washington Street, right after you turned off of Union Street. Okay, it's right over there. There's a Civil War Trails marker in front of it, and that helps us know, okay, this photo's taken from on top of this hill looking back behind me. Okay, and with this, you can start to establish a relationship on what was where. Between that church, part of the building behind me, the yellow building right in front of me, and of course the heights in the distance. Nobody's done a real article or book about the 22nd New York State Militia. It is fascinating. I'm going to skip that one. But man, there are photos of them in front of the church forming a hollow square and everything like that. These guys were a 3-month unit, and they mustered out like 2 weeks before the Confederates attacked. So they totally escaped. You know, and it was just really lucky. So I'm just showing you the volume of them. You can't really see them, but here they are laid out in front of the church, hollow square in one of them. And just trust me, if anybody wants to look at these photos while we're walking around, just bug me while we're walking from place to place, and you can sort through the photos and have fun with them and whatnot.
Or they could buy a copy of Garry Adelman's book, 99 Views of Harpers Ferry.
Or you could win the copy I have for you if you just read my mind.
I've got a silly question for you.
Sure.
The church you showed in the picture, it says in the thing out front about a cannon that fired from Maryland Heights and blew a hole through the wall. But the wall is on the opposite side of Maryland Heights.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, it might have gone through a window. But first of all, so check this out. He stopped at the Civil War Trail sign on the way here and read it.
Yes.
Well done, Rusty. Very cool. Now, the most common building you see in these photos is this one that is in the background of this shot. And it is not the building right here on the right. See how there's 3 sections to the building? It's the 3rd section. That 3rd section is the old section, okay? Now note that we are standing on a National Park Service campus, but it was part of the U.S. Arsenal that was up here. The superintendent lived in that yellow house behind you for a while, or the chief armorer. There was administrative duties in the house over here. There were more buildings along the ridge. And then, of course, it became a college named Storer College, which was in operation from 1865 to 1955. Storer College, a black college, historically black college it's called, was founded right as the Civil War ended. It's perfect. There are United States colored troops all over the place here. And it's just perfect that one would be founded here, and it is not surprising at all. In fact, we have a wartime picture, probably in 1862, showing African Americans and U.S. colored troops right in front of that third building over there. We're going to go over there in a sec so we can talk more about this house. This house that appears in at least 22 photos. And again, most buildings don't have one photo. And those that do, hardly any of them have more than one. Very few appear in 20 plus photos in the Civil War. It's extraordinarily rare, so just so you know. Questions? Let's take a quick walk just right over that giant boulder. Murray Miles, man, you know, maybe not a good idea to have somebody, you know, great, West Point, before Robert E. Lee was there, Mexican War, excellent. Brevet promotion during the war, excellent, to lieutenant colonel. By the way, anyone who's a lieutenant colonel during the Mexican War and only a colonel during the Civil War, maybe not a real ambitious guy. Old soldier, there's 2 photos of him standing right here, and supposedly he wore 2 hats. Okay, because gnats are terrible in this area, and apparently if you ever had a lot of gnats around you, they go to the highest spot. That's why they're always around your head. So he would wear sometimes 2 hats to keep the gnats higher up away from his face. Maybe he's a genius. In any case, at the Battle of Bull Run, he was held in reserve. He had a whole division at the Battle of Bull Run. He was held in reserve, but he was criticized for not acting as he should have and supposedly being drunk. He was found guilty of drunkenness. Okay, let's give this guy an important post at Harper's Ferry. Okay, which is exactly what happened. And this guy could not have disposed of his troops in a worse manner. I know Tim likes this stuff sometimes. And when we get to the lower town, those who've been here before, you know it's an indefensible town, especially if the enemy takes the heights around it. You can't do anything. And he seems to have done the one course of action out of thousands that would end up in the capture of his 12,000 troops at Harper's Ferry on September 15th, 1862. Again, this is part of the Maryland campaign. Troops fought outside of Richmond. Robert E. Lee takes over, pushes them away from Richmond. Lee decides to move northward, Cedar Mountain. They win at Second Manassas, and they come up toward Antietam. And end this Maryland campaign, just fighting at South Mountain. And of course, there's this action at Harper's Ferry, where Stonewall Jackson and his troops capture Loudoun Heights, then capture Maryland Heights, pushing back one particular brigade known as the
Harpers Ferry Cowards?
Harpers Ferry Cowards. Tim wasn't ready. That was awesome. And then Miles holds up on the lowest of all the hills, Bolivar Heights, and Jackson just surrounds him. His men still think, we got 10,000 soldiers, we can hold off. And he's like, no, I think we ought to surrender. And even after his surrender, the troops disagree with him. They continue to fire, during which the Confederates counterfire, and Miles is hit in the leg and badly wounded. And later, not long after, something explodes near him again, and he will die of his wounds the day after the surrender. In any case, Stonewall Jackson shows up and starts talking to the Union commanders over here, battery commanders, saying, hey, there was a white flag, why are you still shooting? He's like, I couldn't, my guns were dispersed, I couldn't get them to stop. Like, and it's this weird thing where Jackson's giving orders to the Union battery commander because they'd already surrendered. It was really interesting stuff. In any case, of all these photos taken here, and there are a lot, I like this photo, which is taken right around past that picnic table there, looking toward this building from the side, okay? And you can see there's like a little extension to the building. Can you sort of see that there's like an extension on the side? Well, if anybody, we're near Spangler Spring, I often point out the anchors that held the Dixie Cup dispenser, and there's always some loser with us like me who's really interested in that. Well, in this case, there's something on the far side of that building that shows that the building used to extend further, and I know some of you will want to go around and check it out. So you can just see it on the far side of the building over there. So again, it helps us to really understand it. Now, of one of the many photos, and I don't know the exact number, it's at least 25, it might be 30 or 35. I think Harper's Ferry in total has to be in the top 12 most photographed places of the Civil War. These are, of course, places you know: Washington, Richmond, Brandy Station, Port Hudson, the only one on the west that makes the list, Chattanooga, Petersburg, Charleston. And then you got places like this with 50, 60, 70, 80 photos taken during the Civil War. And Harper's Ferry is different. Harper's Ferry has a bunch of photos taken in 1859, okay, because of John Brown, okay? Now, so this photo, I'm pointing to a guy right here, William R. Goldschmidt. This is his only war service. He serves for 3 months. They swim in the Potomac. They get their pictures taken. William Goldschmidt does well for himself, becomes a lawyer, becomes a judge, travels the world, and finds himself in April of 1912, early April, in Paris, needing transport back to the United States. He gets a first-class cabin, on this luxurious new ship. And William R. Goldschmidt will be one of the 2.5 million people who survived the Civil War as a soldier, only to die about 50 years later after this photo was taken on the Titanic. And by the way, I simply found this by putting his name into a soldier's database. It was awesome. I learned more about him, then Googled him, and that was it. And I encourage y'all to do that, okay? Now, the lower town is still a good mile away from here, and yet I'm going to talk about what's this. John Brown's Fort, okay? Which of course is where it was a fire engine house and guardhouse, and Brown and his accomplices are going to hole up in this building down in the lower town. I think many of you know it was brought to the World's Fair in Chicago. Only 11 people visited it in 10 days. I don't think that was worth the effort, okay? So they deconstructed it, put it as a pile of bricks in a vacant field, and then there was a movement. A local woman around here said, I want to preserve it. She raised money and found a home for it on the Murphy Farm about 3 miles up on the Shenandoah River, right behind me there. That's the Shenandoah on my right, your left, and the Potomac is coming in on the other side near Maryland Heights, okay? It was here for about 12 years, okay, until Storer College said, hey, you got John Brown. He, is really fighting for our rights. He's a controversial figure. We can talk about him more. So they picked it up brick by brick and moved it to right where those picnic tables are. John Brown's fort sat there for a solid 40 years or something like that. Okay, and we have pictures of it right over there. That building, the Harpers Ferry Center, was not built until, I don't know, the 1970s or 80s, but that was long after John Brown's fort had been deconstructed again and erected in reverse in its current location, which is about 200 feet from its original location, okay? So we'll talk about that more when we get down there as well. But they literally numbered each brick and everything, and there's a big room on one side and a small room on the other. They put it in reverse, so the big room's on the wrong side. So it's not quite in the right place, it's not quite put back together, but a good percentage of the bricks are original.
Why did they not put it back to the original?
To the original
location?
spot?
Yeah.
Because there's he asked, why didn't they put the fort back to the original spot? There's like a 20-foot elevation, and there have been tracks built near there as the railroads got more complex around Harpers Ferry. So there's an obelisk there, but you'll see it's like 20 feet higher.
And also
it wouldn't have
a
mate
bank
sense.
to avoid flooding at the lower end of the town.
Yes,
there.
and they didn't own it either. They didn't own the land. The park didn't. The CSX owned it. So they didn't have that option. And that was that was moved, I think, in time for the centennial in 1959. Questions?
I wanted to point out that Dixon Miles is from Maryland, and Dixon Miles today is buried in northern Baltimore County at a place called Moncton.
Oh, really? I've been there.
On Moncton Road. I think it's St. James Church. And who might live the closest to that cemetery, if anybody here? I'm thinking it's you guys.
More like 10. Okay, not bad. Good. Anything else? All right, let's go back to where we started before we go on our slightly longer walk. Oh, man. And the sign might contradict me, but which was used by one of the dignitaries in the U.S. Armory and Arsenal. Again, the Arsenal is what put Harpers Ferry on the map. Tim will probably talk about this, but Harpers Ferry was, of course, first. Does anyone know the original name of Harpers Ferry when a guy named Stevens owned it? Tim? Anyone?
Stevens Ferry.
Just a terrible name. No, he had a ferry there. He didn't call it Stevens Ferry. It was known as the Hall. This isn't a porno movie. It was like literally like between all of the heights. What is it? It's a hall. Okay? Harper took it over and made a ferry there and called it Harpers Ferry. I think that's a slightly better name. Okay? You'll see that name, not much Stevens, but you'll see the Harpers and you'll also see Wagers. And I'd wager that Tim's going to talk about that to some extent before long. That was my best pun of the day. Sorry, it's all downhill from there. But in any case, this building was later turned into the Virginia Lodge. No, Lodge number 1, West Virginia, Lodge number 1 of the Oddfellows, okay? It went defunct for a while, came back in the 90s, and I think it's still an active lodge, and they actually own, I don't think they keep it in there, I got the hell of the 54th Massachusetts William Carney Medal of Honor recipient's sword. His dress sword is actually in their collections. They have other cool collections inside, but I don't think they keep the most valuable stuff in there for people to disturb and take. But again, you know, there's something about standing where Civil War photos were taken. There's that house. Some are taken from in the field across the street. Some are taken really close up. The group shots, you know, are usually further back, but these people look like they are really close to the house in this case. And what a cool set of things. So I just want to say that you are in one of the most photographed places of the Civil War, okay? Great. Okay, so this is September of 1862. Okay, this is a great question, Wendy. Most of the battles are being won by the South, right? And most of the photographers are Northern. That means they have no access to battlefields. The South kept winning, the Union kept retreating, and what in the world is Brady supposed to take photos of in the late summer of 1862? Okay, he can't photograph anything but the Union camps along Harrison's Landing. So, here's a camp not far from his base in Washington or New York, where he can take photos of a group of soldiers who have nothing going on, okay? Now, a couple weeks later, they would, okay? So, I'll just keep showing these while I talk.
And he can get here by train.
Yes.
Harpers Ferry is easily accessible by train from the capital or from Baltimore.
And my guess is that these soldiers, New Yorkers, so they probably had jobs before it, and they probably had a little money, were buying these photos. That's probably the best reason photographers did well in camps, okay? This group shot might have been bought by 12 different people, okay? Take one photo, make 12 prints, and boom. I have one of the original prints. It's so cool. They came on this beautiful paper that you can see below it. And again, one last summary one just to show. It's just photo after photo after photo after photo that are taken here. Anything else?
Hey, Gary.
Sir.
One thing, you know, probably also, these guys knew they were mustering out. They wouldn't see each other again. So there was like that kind of
that's
last
right.
minute, oh, we can get a photo of the unit. And,
Yeah.
you know, you can remember your buddies from the unit, that type of thing.
Sean makes a great point. And our New Yorkers, not Delaware people, which is even more incredible. These guys wrote a regimental history about their brief service. That's how I know they swam in the Potomac. And these photos adorn the book. Okay, there's so much stuff about them. And to be clear, they're not like all Goldschmidt who went and then, you know, were successful and died on the Titanic. Many of them enlisted in other units and fought throughout the war. So this isn't just 3-month soldiers. A lot of them went and fought in some of the toughest battles of the Civil War. Great one. Sir?
It's called a hole because the Indians call it the lowest elevation in West Virginia.
Here we go. We got a local here. He lives on Loudon Heights right over there. Okay? So that's good. Anything local, after if Tim doesn't cover it right, he's going to be all over Tim when he does his local crap. Now, we're going to walk down that way, okay? There's a sidewalk for part of it, and if not, you can be on the side of the road, okay? If some of you walk in the road and you get run over, I'll be happy, okay? Stay out of the road. I just can't believe it. Tour after tour. I mean, you guys walk in the middle of the road. There's cars coming, given they're not exactly cruising down the road, but we're going to go down a couple of blocks and we'll stop at a cool building. All right? 2 hours and 20 minutes behind. So we got to keep moving here. I'd like to stop here because, first of all, you know, if you can come away from today with an understanding of the major events that happened at Harpers Ferry, you are a genius, okay, if you didn't know about them before. There is so much that happened here. We can't possibly cover it, and we can't cover it in order either. But just know this, there's a lot going on here in 1859 with John Brown's raid. Of course, it's not just the raid itself. They're gathered in Maryland. Before that, they come, they go out in the countryside, they do the raid, and of course, he'll be hanged later that year in Charlestown, West Virginia, okay? Then Charlestown, Virginia. The Civil War comes, of course, and right after Fort Sumter, Stonewall Jackson and other troops come up here. The Union knows they're coming. They burn the U.S. Armory and Arsenal. Jackson comes and occupies the town for a while. Jackson leaves. The Union comes back. The war comes here again, and later in 1862. Dixon Miles will be here. They'll be surrendered. War goes away from here again. There's going to be more going on here in 1863 during the Gettysburg Campaign. There's going to be more going on in 1864 as part of the Shenandoah Campaign. And there are so many commanders overall in here. You've got John White Garry for a while. You've got Albie and Howe. I think there are 12 different Union commanders on site. You've got Dixon Miles. You've got somehow a General Under Miles who comes into command for a little while. I forget his name. So you've just got all sorts of stuff going on here, and we'll do our best to keep reinforcing it. And this building was often a headquarters, most famously for Philip Henry Sheridan. Okay, and this drawing comes from a great book called James Taylor's Sketchbook of the Civil War, which focuses mostly on the valley and has drawings, accurate drawings of things that we have no photos of, early photos of, consistently in the valley. He's got Ramseur, dying at Cedar Creek. He's got some great stuff at 3rd Winchester throughout the valley. So if you ever get your hands on even a copy, a reproduction copy put up in the 70s or 80s called James Taylor's Sketchbook, I would strongly suggest you do it. And just for a little quick then and now freak out, whoa man, wow. This was 9 years ago this month. Hold on, okay, I have less hair now. Hold on, how do you think it would be that funny? Here we go, yeah. Oh, this is taking a while.
3 hours behind.
We're 3 hours and 10 minutes behind. Now, y'all, I'd encourage you to post your photos on this event page, okay? It's the best way for all of us to share our photos and videos from this day, okay? So I don't know why I'm showing this, but you all seem to enjoy it and making fun of me. How much hair I've lost. Did I have a goatee back then? Okay, I did. Then the goatee got really white in patches. The last thing you want is a big white beard. There we go. You good?
Well, you know,
Take him away.
Henry Lockwood had his headquarters here for a while, I believe.
Oh, yes.
And of course, he was the brigade commander on Culp's Hill on the 3rd day of the battle.
And Lockwood had been a brigadier for longer than anyone else in the Union Army at Gettysburg.
And also, when Sheridan had his headquarters here, of course, it was in preparation for that Shenandoah Valley campaign in the fall of 1864. And so if you read books about the Battle of 3rd Winchester, like Sheridan in the Valley by Edward Stackpole, for instance, they start with the illustration of this building in the beginning chapter where he's headquartered here. I think, well, let's walk around to the other side.
All right, this is your group now for a bit.
Let's walk this
Now,
way.
things are really going to drag now, guys. Sorry. Like this. This way. I just can't get enough of that. That's pretty good. That's a reprint. Yeah, I've seen a reprint 400.
Excuse me. Sorry.
That's what I did. Just want some members. Let us have
So, of course, Harpers Ferry is known because of its industrial base at the time of the Civil War. Originally, of course, Harpers Ferry is a very beautiful place. But because of its strategic location and the river junction and the advent of the canals and then the railroad system and then the fact that the United States Arsenal and the armory were brought here, it became this industrial powerhouse. And at the time of the Civil War, it's interesting when you look at photographs of this area, there are virtually no trees on this hill leading down into the lower town. So from this area, historically, there was this fantastic view. And Gary's showing some of these illustrations of the town from up at different various points along this hill.
And let me just say real quick that in this one you can see the original covered bridge. That means this is an 1869 photo, not an 1862 photo or 1865. This is the, yeah, what did I say? Did I say 69? Okay, 59, sorry, thank you, Tim. And she caught it too. So John Brown went across a covered bridge. Sorry, Tim.
So this is the Harper Cemetery, and it's about 4 acres of land that were set aside in 1782, and it was upon Robert Harper's death. Gary mentioned he was the founder of the town, Robert Goodloe Harper. I always find it interesting, the editor of the Adams Sentinel in the town of Gettysburg at the time of the battle is Robert Goodloe Harper. I don't know that they're related that closely, maybe distantly. But Harper lived from 1718 to 1782. He was born in Philadelphia. In 1751, he received a patent for 125 acres of land, and of course, purchased the area, which is now the lower town. By 1763, he had a ferry here, and it was called Robert Harper's Ferry. And of course, the town is named after him. The cemetery, of course, is still active. There are over 1,000 people buried in the cemetery. And again, it's one of the more beautiful sites in the area. And I should point out that right now we are in West Virginia. And of course, off to our right, Loudon Heights is in Virginia, and Maryland Heights is in Maryland. So I think when we get to the lower town, Gary's going to have a stand at the exact boundary of Maryland and West Virginia and Virginia, right?
Sure.
Like walk out into the water.
Yeah, we're going to go to the middle of the confluence. Fast water, people die there all the time.
But of course, this was Virginia at the time of the outbreak of the Civil War. And when did Virginia or West Virginia become a state?
1863.
June
23rd.
No,
June 20th.
yes.
June 20th, 1863. And of course, at Gettysburg, there's this great story that, when the 7th West Virginia learned that, West Virginia become a state, they snuck into the camp of the 14th Indiana, and they cut the star out of the Indiana flag and sewed it on their flag. So at Gettysburg, the state of West Virginia is the only state that has the correct number of stars on their flag. But the cemetery is a pretty beautiful place. I got a couple stories. We're going to walk in through the cemetery, and of course, it's all downhill from now. Grave, I gotta wait till Gary's paying attention, of Michael Gump. His father was George Michael Gump, born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1765. His father was a Revolutionary War soldier. His grandfather came from Germany in 1729 and was an early settler of Lancaster County. His grandfather's name was John Dieter Gump. John Dieter Gump is my great, 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 great grandfather.
Wow.
This is my first cousin, 6 times removed.
I noticed a resemblance.
So the Gump family were gun makers from Lancaster County. They made Pennsylvania long rifles. Michael Gump and his dad came to Harpers Ferry about 1820, where his dad, let's see, I skipped over one, didn't I? Let's see, Michael Gump, George Gump. George, I said, his father's name is actually, no. Okay, George Michael Gump. He came to about 1820, and they came here because of the armory and the arsenal. Early on, before they didn't have the ability to mass produce the weapons that they did later, they were actually using artisans and craftsmen who were superior gun makers, and they brought a lot of gun makers into Harpers Ferry. A lot of people who were in this industry moved here for this specific purpose. Now, you can see that here on the grave that Michael Gump died in 1850, I believe. It's kind of hard to read. His son was George Washington Gump, and his son lived here and worked here and married a local girl, Sarah Chambers, who was a descendant of the niece of Robert Harper, and they're the Wager family, as you mentioned. They lived here until 1861, when, because of the outbreak of the Civil War, the arsenal personnel was moved and they took up residence in Springfield, Massachusetts, not surprisingly, at the arsenal there. But George Washington Gump, this guy's son, had a son named Willard Chambers Gump, who was born in 1853, and he was 6 years old in October 1859 during John Brown's raid. He lived until 1931, and he was one of the longest survivors, or one of the people that was a go-to guy for information about the raid. And in 1929, he wrote a lengthy article about John Brown's raid. Excuse me. And according to the preface of the article, Mr. Gump has supplemented his own vivid memories of what happened by conversations with others who were present and by researchers in the newspaper and other records of the time. And in the following article, he tells the story, introducing many details which are not generally known and giving the freshness of the contemporary event to the grim tragedy which suddenly and unexpectedly focused the attention of the whole nation on the little town of Harpers Ferry. And he goes on to say that in 1859, Harpers Ferry was manufacturing between 1,500 and 2,000 guns a month. Our family lived close by. They actually lived up in a house on Camp Hill at the time of the Harpers Ferry raid. Jefferson Davis, when Secretary of War, sold my father a lot on Camp Hill, which I just sold in 1920. I do not know where he lived or which one of the houses was his. But in his account, which is quite lengthy, and I think I'll put the account, a link to it, on our event page if you'd like to visit and read his account.
I give it a 5% chance Tim will do that.
Okay.
Tops.
His grandfather on his Chambers side was once the mayor of Harpers Ferry when it became an incorporated entity in 1845. It had its own mayor. Of course, he wasn't the mayor at the time of the Harpers Ferry raid. The mayor of the town was killed in the raid. What's his name? Fontaine Beckham? Sure. This kid was one of the people who, the day after the raid, went out onto the railroad bridge and saw the body of William Thompson. Remember how they left some of the raiders in the water after they were shot? According to the account, he fell into the water and clung to a pier where he was again shot, and his body laid there for a day or two with its ghastly face turned upwards. I saw the body on Wednesday. And he afterwards went on to become a collector of John Brown raid memorabilia, and his collection, some of it's at a historical society in Massachusetts. At the time, and of course he was one of the people who went over to see John Brown's execution. So I've always had this kind of personal connection here, although, you know, I kind of live in Gettysburg and don't come here that much. Well, let's walk down and see the grave of Robert Harper.
Yeah, and right before we do, two things. One, I just can't stress enough that you need actual time and thought to digest this idea of John Brown. I mean, show me another person who the NAACP and the KKK have both leveraged for their purposes, okay? This is a complex man. Even people that are all the way behind him usually find some stuff about him they don't like so much. And people who are all the way against him see something maybe not so bad in what he did. So I just wanted to clarify or point out that while we're here talking about John Brown, to think about that stuff. You know, we always want to put people into one basket. Are you this or are you that? Especially nowadays, and especially during the Civil War, by the way. People's lives were complex. Secondly, as we walk down toward that grave, some of you might take the first of at least 100 steps. We're going to go down. We're going to eventually go down some steps over there. This is dangerous stuff, okay? You fall down some of those steps, you're in real trouble, okay? And the group will keep moving. Just kidding. Well, we might, actually. Okay? So please be safe. Likewise, it's only going to get hotter, okay? So,
Show the photo from here.
yeah, or are we going down a Harper? Yeah, I'll do it from here, you're right. You know, drink your water. There's water down in the town. There's a gift shop if you need more. And remember, you know where your car is. So if you get separated from us, it's not the end of the world. Stay safe. Okay, so I just wanted to have that plea. And before we move on, this is a great place, as Tim reminds me, to show just a great photo. I'm going to take a few steps over. It's going to show Maryland Heights right over there, and it's going to show some of the gravestones, namely one. And you can just see the view from this cemetery. You see the headstone in the foreground. After I show this, if anybody wants to take this on their own and look for this headstone, there are some peculiarities about the stone that should be findable if it's still there. A lot of these things have worn down over the years, but man, what a beautiful cemetery, and one that we can line up photos with. It's not just using rocks. We can use trees. We can use headstones themselves if, poltergeist style, those graves haven't been moved. So really cool stuff. And by the way, this is just one of many photos taken from up here. I have one more to show you while we're here, because later we're going to have the United States Colored Troops also camped on Camp Hill, and you can see some of their semi-permanent living quarters as well in this shot. Again, you can date your shots based on the bridge, based on whether the arsenal is burned or not. Again, the Yankees burned it in April of 1861 to prevent it from falling in Stonewall Jackson's hands. Now, you won't be able to see it, but you're going to see some tents. This one's taken a little further over from the cemetery, but a beautiful shot where you can line up and learn about the town, one of the most photographed towns from above at least. And on one of the tent flap doors, there's a real door on some of these tents. They're like apparently winter quarters. This was probably taken in April of 1865. This is a USCT camp, and you can see a portrait on one of the doors under blow-up, and I can't quite tell, but I think it's Abraham Lincoln. And would that not be cool if the USCT camp has a portrait of Abraham Lincoln on one of their doors? And just so you know, there are something like 28 Abraham Lincolns fighting in the Civil War, and 27 of them are United States Colored Troops who gave that name when they enlisted. Could you imagine? You know, someone's recently liberated, and they say, "What's your name?" And he says, "Abraham Lincoln." Okay, it's so cool. Okay, questions? Tim, lead the way. You can take the steps or the slope. Just be careful, please. Yes, so in the first one. Anyone want to try to find the
Stuff from the Southern Arson, because there was kind of a little stuff going on there. Out the United States Army armory and arsenal at the time of the outbreak of the Civil War. And I was going to talk about down there, but I can talk about it anywhere, I guess. The guy who's in charge of the armory and arsenal, let's see, where did I put that? I do have a paper here somewhere where I made a note.
Because you're going out of order, I'm scrambling to find the photo I need to show when you talk.
Okay. Oh, good. Are you going to show that?
Heck yeah.
On the evening of the April 18th, several hundred Virginia militiamen marched on the United States Armory and Arsenal to Harpers Ferry. The federal garrison at that point was made up of a small force of United States regulars under the command of Lieutenant Roger Jones. When word arrived of the intended attack, the outnumbered defenders set fire to the works. About 10 p.m., an explosion ripped through the night air as the soldiers made their way across the Potomac into Maryland. The townspeople, soon exhausted, extinguished the flames, but Jones had destroyed some 15,000 muskets, preventing them from falling into the hands of the rebels. The garrison marched all night to Hagerstown and then gained transport to Chambersburg, where they arrived the next morning and exhausted and footsore. And when they told their story, Roger Jones became one of the first heroes for the Northern Army of the American Civil War. And he's right up there with Elmer Ellsworth. Has article after article after article about him and how smart it was for him to destroy and burn the arsenal before the Southern forces moved on the town. He asked, well, why didn't they move the guns with all the things going on, you know, at the time of the outbreak of the war?
And with the railroad.
And they have a railroad right there. But maybe perhaps you know, the Secretary of War, who is her name is Elizabeth Walker. Okay, you can Google it. No,
Cameron?
the Union Secretary of War under Buchanan is a Southerner. And he went to great strides to make sure that the United States Army did not move arms and equipment out of arsenals in the South in
Floyd.
preparation.
It was Floyd.
Yes, Floyd.
Oh, Floyd. Oh. Oh. Okay.
Tim's going to be
No, good.
tormented
Very good.
tonight.
Very good. So, and you know, some of the stuff that goes on here, the governor of Virginia actually makes preparations with the Virginia militia to get them into position in case Virginia secedes from the Union so that they can march on Harper's Ferry. There's some of this stuff that takes place, and I know one of our friends, we don't always agree with him, he's written a whole thing about how this is treason by the state of Virginia in opposition to the federal government. Prior to Virginia succeeding, they're already making plans to attack and capture the arsenal. Think about this too. I mentioned it's 10 p.m. on April 18th. The next day in Baltimore, Massachusetts troops are attacked by a mob. This is the night before. So if there had been soldiers killed in this fighting, if Jones had stayed and they were overrun and it was a small battle, this would have been the first bloodshed of the American Civil War. But Jones blew up the Army arsenal and got out of Dodge. So here is the grave of Robert Harper, and of course the founder of Harper's Ferry, and so we're in the Harper Cemetery. And Garry, did you guys find it?
I'm really happy to announce this. Sean and Anthony went looking for this largest grave marker in here and could not find it. But it's a cemetery. These things were not built to last centuries, although they thought it at the time. But they do have a good line on two of the shorter ones you can see, which might be right against the wall over there. So good job, guys. I think they might be right.
Okay.
I think that's all I have. Down the
The
steps.
path is there.
Okay, steps there.
The path is over there. So you can get to that. We're going to go that way.
What was that?
Oh, you know what? It's right here. Okay, we're at Jefferson Rock, or Jefferson's Rock. And of course it's called that because Thomas Jefferson stood near here on October 25th, 1783. And when he wrote a book, which was published in 1785, called The Notes on the State of Virginia, he wrote, "The passage of the Potomac through the Blue Ridge is perhaps one of the most stupendous scenes in nature. You stand on a very high point of land. On your right comes up the Shenandoah, having ranged along the foot of the mountains 100 miles to seek a vent. On your left approaches the Potomac in quest of a passage also. In the moment of their junction, they rush together against the mountains, rent it asunder, and pass off to the sea. but the distant finishing which nature has given the picture of is a very different character. It is a true contrast to the former. It is placid and delightful as that is wild and tremendous. The scene is worth a voyage across the Atlantic. And of course, that's the famous quote that people use. Now, the name caught on, and I Googled it on newspapers.com to see what kind of early articles I could find. In 1829, here's an interesting article.
Right.
In Charlestown, West Virginia, or actually Virginia, while a driver of a public team was engaged with his wagon and 2 horses upon the hill near Jefferson's Rock, a severe clap of thunder frightened the horses, and they ran towards the precipice. The impulse given by the wagon pulled it out of their power to stop, and they were precipitated from a large rock a distance of about 40 feet before they struck. One of them was killed, and although the other was severely bruised and cut, he was let off and will probably recover. It didn't say anything about the driver, so I take it he jumped off. But it's kind of hard to tell here, but right on the other side of the rock,
Right.
it
cliff.
drops off
Right.
tremendously, and Shenandoah Street that leads downtown is right at the base of this hill.
Right.
And when you look at the pictures of the town at the time of the Civil War, there are houses along Shenandoah Street at the base of the hill. Here's an article from 1845 from the New York Daily Herald. A group of visitors came here by train. At Harpers Ferry, with a friend, we climbed upon Jefferson's Rock above the town, a sort of trap rock, elevated like a center table on one leg and literally covered with chiseled and scratched inscriptions. It was here, at this spot, whence Jefferson is supposed to have taken his view of the junction of the Shenandoah and the Potomac. So by 1845, the rock was covered with graffiti. An 1848 article from the Boston Atlas. I toiled up this height in order to see Jefferson's Rock, a large boulder weighing several tons, which is poised upon one point and could apparently be rolled off into the river beneath without much difficulty. It is covered with names, some of them chiseled out with great neatness, and while I was there, 2 returning volunteers of the Mexican War were cutting the letters 3 inches long and inscribing the honored name, Zachary Taylor. I asked one of the carvers if he intended to vote for Taylor. Vote for old Zach, was his indignant reply. Do you suppose that anyone who ever knew the man would not vote for him? And so I think it's interesting when you read the accounts of the Civil War that soldiers who were stationed at Harpers Ferry made their way here and also carved their name on the rocks around us. And the 4 posts holding up the rock replaced the original appearance of the rock, and they were placed here about 1860, I believe. And so there is graffiti everywhere. And I don't know if you ever identified specific soldiers' graffiti, but it was a place where there's lots of graffiti even before the Civil War.
Yeah, and by the way, for when we do go, we're going to continue down that path over there. But if you're able, the view from there isn't the same as it is, say, from here or from there, where you can kind of look and see Jefferson's view, even though you're not supposed to climb onto the rock itself. But you can get a view from this rock or from over there if you'd like. Let me say again, so you're looking at the pedestals as the soldiers saw them. The photos I showed you were post-war, but not that long after. One was 1876, one soon after that. So soldiers were here in this configuration, and like Tim said, it was just a balancing rock when Jefferson was here, and then soon after, it was very dangerous. So these things are old, even the things that are up there. Right down below here is an island called Virginius Island, and Virginius Island was a massive industrial complex especially after the Civil War, but also during, where they had canning operations and all sorts of industrial operations. Those of you who ever drive down to Lower Town or take the bus see the mill races and whatnot to make those operations run. I mean, a major industrial section, so that's really cool.
And it was a Shenandoah Canal, and of course the C&O Canal came in from the other direction.
Now, what we're going to do is we can't really go down for these next sections together. It's going to take a little while. We'll get to one plateau. You're going to pass by, I think, the Wager House, and there's a little tavern there. You're going to pass by a couple of churches, one of which didn't fly the U.S. flag, didn't fly the CS flag, because this town kept changing hands, so they had to be neutral. They flew the British flag, which is really cool, during the Civil War, just so they're like, no, it's not us. You'll then go down, eventually, when you know you're near the bottom, well, A, because you can see the town, but you're going to go down the famous stone steps, which date to before the Civil War, okay? When it rains here, they become the Stone Steps River, and I think there are railings for most of them, okay? But these are precipitous. They are not consistent, they're long, they're tall, on and off. So please be careful and take your time getting down. When we do get down to the main street, we're gonna turn right where there is a set of bathrooms and a bookstore, okay? But then we will gather across the street from there at what we call the flood area, okay? So let's make our way down. We know it'll take a while, but we're not gonna try to talk on the way down unless, Tim, did you have anything? So just go that way. We'll make our way down, and then after a quick break, we'll then regather across.
Oh, yeah, it's new kidney, so, you know, it's all fair. Yeah, he got it donated.
The road we came off on where the lower stone steps took us to, that's Washington Street. That's the way we're going to take back to go back up to our cars toward the hill. In other words, Washington Street runs up the hill, and Fillmore Street, the street on which we met, is parallel. In other words, if you ever want to at any point break off, find your car, walk up Washington Street for a while, stay on the sidewalks where there are sidewalks, okay? And then at some point when you get a good ways up, turn left. Gilmore Street is a good one to do it on. Turn over to Fillmore and that'll take you back to your car. Does that make sense? All right, so Lower Town, Shenandoah Street, Washington, and Fillmore runs eventually that way near the top. That's the Shenandoah River you can see moving around there. The Potomac we're yet to see close up yet, but we will soon enough. And the confluence they meet at a place called the Point that we'll go to. This is the newer of the two railroads that came here at the time. This was the Winchester and Shenandoah Railroad. This is going to easily help Bill Sheridan move troops out toward the Opacan Creek and 3rd Winchester in 1864. It's also taking prisoners, Confederate prisoners away. There's a picture actually I think that shows that, as well as Union troop movements are also captured on pictures as well. Tim?
You know, one of the big problems with the idea of creating this industrial complex around these fast-moving rivers in a sort of a depression or a hole, or as one person pointed out, the lowest point in the state of West Virginia, is the fact that the rivers flood occasionally. And there are different accounts of the various floods. And according to local legend, in 1748 it flooded, and it drove Robert Harper from his log cabin that he acquired from Peter Stevens. In 1753, there was a massive flood here. In 1852, it was the greatest flood the settlers had seen since they had arrived in Harpers Ferry. Water-powered dams on the Potomac and Shenandoah suffered considerable damage. In 1870, the Shenandoah River rose so rapidly that the residents of the industrial complex on Virginia's Island were unable to escape, and 42 people died. In 1877, the water crested to 29 feet. In 1889, it was recorded at 34 feet, destroying the Shenandoah Wagon Bridge and forcing a flour mill in Virginia's Island to close for good. In 1896 was one of the worst floods in the town history when the river crested 33 feet. In 1924, apparently it flooded to the depth of 27 feet. In 1936, it was 36 feet, the all-time record for the crest at Harpers Ferry. In 1942, it was 33 feet. In 1972, I'm sure a lot of you remember, during Hurricane Agnes, it was 29 feet above river level. In 1985, it got to 29 feet. In 1996, there were two separate floods that year. One in January because of the snow melting from a record blizzard, and it rose to 29 feet. And then again in September of 1996, after a series of rainstorms, it rose again to 29 feet. So in that year, there were two different floods of 29 feet each. And if you want to try to picture what we're talking about in the depth of, if you can't tell Gary's photographs, they have this nice gauge on the side of the building that shows you the record flood from 1936 and how high the water was actually located.
Now, one thing you got to know down here at Harpers Ferry, we're not doing it today. I'm sorry, if you're with our group, there's a great set of interpretation. Harpers Ferry's Lower Town consists of, among other things, a group of museums. There's a John Brown Museum, there's an industry museum, there's a dry goods store, there's confectionery, there's a bar that doesn't serve liquor. God, he really looked up fast when I said that. There's one just to Meriwether Lewis and whatnot. So there's just a series of things, and we'll walk by some of them.
There are some bars that are open.
Yes, you good? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's go that way. Come on this way.
Yeah.
And, we are at the site of the armory buildings that were destroyed in that drawing that Garry had earlier when Jones destroyed the armories and left the area in April of 1861.
And let me be clear real quick. Armory Arsenal. The arsenal is here, okay? And I think that's where they make the bullets and the powder and stuff like that.
Okay, I got it backwards.
And the armory is over there, okay? So the armory is the long set of buildings, and the one I showed on fire is all up just beyond that hill you see over there where John Brown's fort used to sit. So while I'm on it, just to orient us here, the building on your right is that building on the corner right over there behind me, okay? It has distinctive double chimney thing going on with a pointy roof. Can't really see it well from up here. But the other largest building beyond the gates is that right there, and you can see the footprint there. These footprints were uncovered for the 150th anniversary in 2009. It was sort of the first of the sesquicentennial events, and they found the foundations underground and raised non-historic foundations to show you where the corners were. So I think it's a really effective thing. That's the small arsenal that you see in this picture here, and behind me was the large arsenal that doesn't appear in the picture, okay? So this is how you lay out the two arsenals. They were also burned, of course, and the armories that are over there. Now, when they burn the armories, it's important to know that not only did they burn and destroy guns and stuff, they also dumped the gun-making equipment into the river, okay, into the Potomac River. But one of the only things the Confederates could salvage was that gun-making equipment, and using the few pieces they were able to get, they were able to construct more of them, and they formed the base of some of the Confederate arsenals, such as at Tredegar Iron Works and other armories in Augusta and elsewhere. So that was a really important thing the Yankees failed on. They, I think, underestimated the desire of the Confederates to end up with actual, gun-making equipment. And let me stress, I can't stress this enough, we say it on every tour probably, this thing you've heard about the North being sort of more industrial and the South being more agricultural is just as real as it gets, okay? South never had enough guns, never enough ships and rams, never enough cannons, and when they did have cannons, the ammunition and fuses within didn't work as well. For every Southern factory worker, the North had an entire factory, okay? And that's the best stat of all, okay? That along with that there's been a book written about the Civil War on average every day since the Civil War. Those are my two favorite stats. And most of them are just terrible. And we have some of those to give away to you today. Let me say, by the way, that when we get to Antietam, we have bullets from the battle. We have a signed first edition William A. Frazanito Antietam book, the book that got me into the Civil War in the first place, dated today. Wow. He signed it 6 years ago, but we knew we were going to do this. Okay? Go ahead, Tim.
So, in the end, it wasn't just the Civil War that destroyed Harpers Ferry's industrial base. It was also the constant flooding that continually destroyed and really hindered the people's ability to keep rebuilding the industry here in the lower town. Probably by the 1840s, this industry was at its height with, rifle making factories, the armory, the arsenal, and there were probably like 3,000 people living here in the lower town. But, today, it's a much of a park setting. There are trees around us, and at that time it was just wide open, and there were lots of people and lots of construction and lots of locomotives, and of course there were bars and houses of prostitution, of course. So speaking of that,
Whoa, you got a trip planned or something?
what was it, 2001, between August and November, they filmed the movie Gods and Generals. And in the movie, I'm sure many of you know, that there's a street fighting scene in Fredericksburg in the movie. And it's, I'd say, one of my favorite scenes in Gods and Generals. I didn't like the movie at all, but I loved the street fighting scenes. I thought that's what's missing from the movie Gettysburg. In the first day's fighting, they just kind of shift south of town and don't show any town or any streets. And so they decided that in Fredericksburg, the battle, they would have some street fighting scenes. And so they filmed those scenes in Harpers Ferry in November of 2001. They actually built a couple fake buildings and a couple front of a few buildings over here, and they actually covered the streets and sort of dirt, what would you call it? Mulch. And so here is a photograph from the filming of the movie, and the photograph is taken a short distance up the street looking up Washington Street. So, and if you get a chance to watch Gods and Generals again, look for some of the buildings that you recognize here in the movie. There's an excellent scene of street fighting in the movie up Washington Street and High Street, which I think we're going to walk up to. This photograph is from over there looking across towards John Burns Fort, John Brown's. How could I make that mistake? And the buildings, there's some fake buildings built along the bank there of the embankment leading up to the railroad. So you can see that in there.
What I like is from the movie, when you watch it, you wonder, where's that massive hill above Fredericksburg dominating the whole place? And you get to see it in the movie.
Cool. I don't know if I thought about that. And then this is one that is taken in the street looking in that direction. You can kind of see the side of the building, and the you can't see the church above it. But in the photograph Garry was showing, it's kind of looking right up at the Catholic Church. They're just looking right up there.
Yeah, they were right by the stairs, weren't they?
Yeah, right near the stairs there. And I do have a photograph. I think you showed this one, Garry, didn't you?
I don't know.
Of the Mayo for that first. I don't know if I have it now. I'm losing it. One Tipton photograph?
Garry, I don't know. There's a lot of those too.
Okay.
I missed part of the talk, so
Okay.
Oh, it goes a little further.
This building has been taken down and rebuilt 6 times.
So, I want to lay out the arsenal just real quick before the armory, okay? Remember, the small arsenal's there, the large arsenal's there, and the armory spreads out that way. Now, I'm going to show you a picture here showing the engine house, this, on your left, okay? But here's the key. See how there's a street there running down? That's not this street, okay? Rather, John Brown's fort, this fire engine house, sits where that obelisk monument is behind me, but 20 feet lower. In other words, you have to picture that obelisk there at ground level, and then imagine the street on the other side of it, okay? So in other words, up where that wooden fence is down there, it was at ground level at the time, and there ran the main street you see in this photo. Does that make some sense? Yep. It's important to be able to picture it, because that therefore places the armory not here, not back there, all right along the river out in that direction. It was a massive complex. You can see it's like a big street here. You can also see, near point and everything like that, how John Burns might have holed up there, okay? In other words, he's getting pushed back. Here you have this building. It's got some sturdy doors on it. It's a brick building, okay? And I think you know how this story unfolded. In the summer of 1859, or early fall, John Brown and his accomplices gather at the Kennedy farm. It's, I don't know, 8 miles from here, but somehow it takes like 40 minutes to get there. And he takes on a name. Anyone know his alias? Smith, Isaac Smith. He starts gathering accomplices. It's interesting. John Brown, right? Liberal guy, wants to free all the slaves and everything. Doesn't necessarily want to give them guns, even if he had them. So they're going to be armed with pikes. They're going to lead an uprising. The plan works really well at first, but most plans aren't destined to last. Of course, they come across the bridge, get the one guard over there, silence the other guard that's guarding the arsenal. Again, the main gates that I showed you are like right around here. You can see them in the picture. And they basically capture the arsenal and armory. But he doesn't count on the town turning against him, let alone soldiers and civilians flooding from the countryside and from Washington, D.C., the main contingent led by Robert E. Lee. Lee's middle name? All right, same as mine. And his sort of main lieutenant there, Jeb Stuart, okay? Of course, he's in there, Brown's in there with several of his accomplices, and his, among them, one of his sons or more. In the meantime, they've got like a hostage that they've gotten, a rich slave owner from the countryside. They bashed in a few doors, but there was no uprising. It completely failed. It didn't go as they expected, and now he's going to be surrounded in part by United States troops who demand his surrender. Again, imagine the house is flipped though. The big room was on the other side, and this room was on the small, on the other side. But other than that, these are a lot of the original bricks that went to Chicago, then to the Murphy Farm, then to Camp Hill, and then back down here, not far from where it originally stood. Okay. Eventually, of course, the U.S. soldiers come and bash in the door with a ladder. They flood in, kill or wound most of the accomplices. One guy is bayoneted to the wall, so he's literally hanging there. Afterwards, supposedly on the far wall, and it's just a disaster. Brown probably would have rather died, but in the process, in the intervening 2 months or so, when he's brought to trial in Charlestown, Virginia, during which both sides sort of turned against him. I mean, it's really hard to support insurrection, regardless of which side you're on, at least in 1859. It's, of course, one of the biggest sparks. But then he, of course, becomes a martyr by saying, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the guilty crimes of this guilty land cannot be purged away but with blood. And he goes to the scaffold as a larger-than-life figure, and it's only grown since. And there's a whole museum to him right in there, and it's really well done. They have one of the prison gates that held him in Charlestown. They have some of the pikes, one of them, I think, original, and a really good story, and they tie it all up at the end of the museum. I want to stress that, if y'all aren't lunch eaters, as long as you get to Antietam by 1:30 or 1:25 to Burnside Bridge, you can spend some time here after we're done. We only have one more main stop and then a half stop after this.
And you don't have to go. You don't have to sit through the various programs at the John Brown Museum to walk through it. You can just walk through it and see it. It's really, really nice.
Yeah, and we already paid your park admission as part of your fee.
My favorite museum in Harpers Ferry has always been the John Brown Wax Museum.
That's not free, right?
No, it does charge admission. It is the most over-the-top, ludicrous, hokiest thing you will ever see. And I love it. Of course you do. Worse than a ghost tour.
I like the way Tim didn't say ludicrous, but he talked about the rapper Ludacris, which I think is really funny. Now, of course, John Brown's fort, before it was ever moved to Chicago, became famous. Okay, again, it's a fire engine house. It's not built as a fort, but he sort of used it as a fort. So it wasn't too long before people went and put the words on it. John Brown's fort. And by the way, again, if you have any doubts about the location, you think I'm full of it, as to the location of that obelisk, well, first of all, this isn't my suggestion, but again, you can see that distinctive house right above it. You can see over there now with the pointy thing between two chimneys. I would do well to study architectural history, so I'm going to have to call it a pointy thing. The roof point or the eaves or whatever are right between the peak. Right there. You can clearly see it, and there are at least 50 or 90 post-war pictures, early post-war pictures of that fort in that location. Okay, and like all famous structures, people went to visit it. They took pictures in front of it, and you can barely see it here, but trust me, you can see on the wall in front of it, Haynes liver pills for torrid liver. For those of you who've been on my talks before, you can see Rogers or Haynes liver pills desecrating rocks at Culp's Hill in 1867 or 1869. You can see it on the original Gaines's Mill foundation in the 1870s and 1880s. And here you see it on John Brown's fort. It's like this place was just like, okay, I really want to go out of my way to desecrate particular historic sites, which is what they did. And this was total snake oil. I've looked at the things in the past. It's like it can cure a variety of things. My favorite one of which is depression of spirits and imaginings of evil. Oh yes, buy Haynes's liver pills. They put some plant in the crowd saying, I took Haynes's, and it really worked. It sold like crazy. It was a very sophisticated marketing operation and desecration operation. Tim?
I guess we're going to get ready to walk out Washington Street, is that right?
That is correct. I want to, whoa, I skipped some
we going
photos
on
here.
to the point?
Oh, no, I got more
no,
coming
no,
up.
we're going over
No, yeah, we're going to go there first. But
One thing while we're just standing here, since it's not easy to understand, one of my best friends in Gettysburg made these shirts, and you know, he gave me a few of them, and I thought maybe today would be a good day to wear it. And nobody seems to get it at all. Although when he made it, he thought like instantly everybody would know what he was referring to. So it's Civil War is over if you want it. It's a reference to John Lennon's Christmas song. War is over if you want it. You see, do you get that?
so first thing we need
How many
to,
people got that before I told them?
before you
Lord.
talk, I just think on these tours we need less local crap and more Tim singing. Let's head out here. It's beautiful. It's Ferry, maybe 4. The main one, Harper Cemetery. Another one from the point near what is now the Hilltop House and will be refurbished before long. Jefferson's Rock, and then here at the point specifically. People really enjoyed taking photos from here. We also have drawings here. We don't have any photos of the Confederate occupation, but you can very clearly see here some first national flag images flying over Harpers Ferry here. So we actually do have some visual representation of the Confederate occupation here. And it wasn't just once, like I said, it was something like 12 times, depending on how you count it. I mean, if one soldier enters the town, is that changing hands? Somehow Winchester uses that to come up with 73 times it changed hands. 105 now it is. You know, I'll go with more. It's probably realistically more like 30. It really depends on what you count. So in that drawing I just showed you, there was the covered bridge. In this one, you can see, maybe, that there is a railroad bridge. And I'll say, oh, you're too far away, you can't see it. Well, you should have stood closer. Okay? I don't feel bad. Well, you're kind of close together now, so I shouldn't chastise you right now. Okay? But you can really trace the history and dates of Harpers Ferry by, is there still a main bridge here, a covered bridge? Is this iron bridge here yet? Are there pontoon bridges? And you can use all sorts of other things to date them. And of course, as we know, and as I hope you know, that once you find out the location and the date of a photo or a drawing, it becomes a historical document, maybe more rich in information than any other or almost any other. Give me a sec here. I thought I had more down here. Sometimes I have too many photos for my own good. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm not seeing them. That might be it here. Now, I like standing here and pointing to so many things you can see. You can still see the remnants of the original, of one of the bridges that span the Shenandoah River over there. During the Civil War, Alfred Wade drew a drawing that shows them kind of almost pulleying things across it with a rope system. And of course, you can see several sets of bridge abutments along the way over there. You can see one of the railroad bridges at the far, the railroad and pedestrian bridge here. And by the way, if you've never been on the Appalachian Trail, here's your chance. That's on the Appalachian Trail. So take a picture next to the sign. That's the Appalachian Trail, or that's part of it. Okay, it goes through the mountains off that away. Okay, and then there's this one that was really in use for a time after the Civil War, and you can see numerous pictures of it and whatnot. You also have people kind of going to the other side and taking pictures back in this direction. Beautiful shots showing the town, Camp Hill, all the places we've already been. So I would encourage you to go to loc.gov. If this isn't something you do every day, week, month, or at least once a year, go there, type in something you're interested in, and when you don't download the high resolution ones, they're free. Okay, those are the TIFF images. That means you can zoom in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 clicks and not really lose resolution. You can always learn something new or see something that's cool. I can't remember downloading a picture, well, maybe a few, and saying, wow, I'm really sorry I did this. This is totally uninteresting. There's almost always a person doing something outside a building or something happening in these photos, so I really encourage you to do it. This stuff I have, sure, I have some photos that aren't on Library of Congress, but really, people get this impression that the discoveries or conclusions we draw or the photos we show on this are somehow inaccessible. That's not the case. I really try on these tours to get y'all to go out and just investigate something you don't know, and it's always cool. And by the way, this is how we perpetuate our democracy, by learning about and sharing with the next generations our shared history, without which our democracy will certainly fail. And that's what Benjamin Franklin said after they created this form of democratic republican government. Go ahead, Tim.
Nobody asked your question?
Nobody asked my question. Someone came really close. Somebody made a statement about it, but did not ask a question that I was looking for.
I did not do it right now.
Okay.
Tim, what about ghosts? Are you going to talk about ghosts?
Now that deserves a prize right there.
There are several ghost tours in Harpers Ferry, but oddly enough, there are no ghosts in Harpers Ferry.
Oh no!
I've been on ghost tours here.
There are a few ghost tours that are very popular.
They moved it, Eddie.
No, I'm not going to give it away yet because I'm still hoping someone will get this book.
Which bridge were they using in September '62?
Is that, you actually want to know, or are you hoping that's the question?
I will.
Okay.
That's the question.
It depends what you mean. In September '62, you know, they're using both of them. They're using that one that's still operational with pedestrian and train bridge across it, and then this one too, depending on which way you were going.
The cavalry, when the cavalry was getting out, would have been this.
They want to cross the pontoon bridge, right? The
Yes,
cavalry,
yeah,
the
because
Germans,
yeah,
the cavalry.
exactly. The Confederates
That was a
burned
pontoon bridge.
all the bridges in April of 1861. So for a while, there are only pontoon bridges, and then they rebuild the bridges. They get burned again. So it really depends on when. It's tough.
Did you see the fort that McLaws
Yes.
invested
So,
in here?
by the way, when you go across here, you can see that overlook over there. That's what it's called. That's Maryland Heights. It's a heck of a climb. You go across here, walk along the C&O Canal, conceived by and put into operation by George Washington, who conveniently owned a lot of land that the canal would serve. What do you know? He selected the location for Harpers Ferry, saying there is a never-ending supply of water, true, to run the mills. And you can go up and you can walk across the hill to get to the overlook. And if you're not tired enough, you can then walk another mile and a half up to the top and around the crest to the stone fort. And it is just awesome.
So to start here, to walk up the Maryland Heights, which Gary and I have done a few times, and I made my son do it just 2 years ago. It's a lot of fun. It's 2 miles up and 2 miles back, so that's like a 4-mile trip, right?
Yeah, and it's the real deal.
And to go to the stone
It's
fort,
nothing like that little warm-up exercise we just did.
to go to the stone fort, which is out over the peak and out along the peak, I think it's a 6-mile venture to get all the way out there and all the way back.
Yeah, and let me just say, what was I going to say? Abraham Lincoln, who, by the way, used to go to towns and challenge people to wrestle, who could hold an axe out this way for, I don't know, 70 hours or something like that, turned around, unable to continue. Now, given he was about a little old, he's about Tim's age, or younger, when he tries to climb Maryland Heights in 1862, October 1st, 1862. He stayed up on Camp Hill when he was here, by the way, which is really cool. And what was I going to say? Something else. Oh, yeah. During the Battle of South Mountain, the Confederates, of course, pushed the Harpers Ferry cowards out. They're known as Willard's Brigade at Gettysburg, and they sort of did really well and eliminated their terrible moniker at that point. But then Lafayette McLaws' troops are up there, and when William B. Franklin finally pushes through Crampton's Gap, it took him a long time. That's the first gap over that way. McLaws is really concerned, so he sends, I think, Semmes's brigade of Georgians over to Crampton's Gap, and Franklin, who was ordered to come and relieve Harpers Ferry, had no interest in pursuing this far, and the Confederates then made this place surrender the next day.
Yeah, now McLaws' troops, you probably know, to get to Antietam, they actually came off the mountain and crossed over the pontoon bridge into Harpers Ferry, and then went up with the forces to Sharpsburg. So they did not leave, they did not go back because Franklin's men had the valley blocked off at that time.
Good, good. Are you sure no one else has a question?
I want to know how Menin got that insignia on there.
That's almost the question. They used a scaffold, and a guy used, like a German guy used a paint that included goat milk, and they've tried to sandblast it off many times. Aha!
Menin
Hey,
bore
look,
a
this
late
is finally
toilet
won
powder.
the prize from the day. What does that say?
Menin toilet. Menin borate.
Menin borate talcum toilet powder. Well done, Ed. Okay, so we had, you can still see it up there. We got, how did they put it there?
I knew what it says.
And we didn't get, how did it say? What did it say? So that's the question I usually get. Exactly. And you can see it from the window, and you can see how it originally looked. Apparently the park has tried to sandblast it off more than once, and it is on there. This is what I heard from a ranger that I may or may not trust. His name is Justin. who was a ranger here for about 1 year back in the 90s. Other questions or comments?
Why didn't the Union occupy the Heights?
So why didn't the Union occupy the Heights? They did occupy Maryland Heights. And man, when you go up there, you're thinking, I'm never going to lose this thing. But a lot of times, you can blame the Harper Ferry cowards if you like. But you know, holding a high hill isn't always good. Axe, Braxton Bragg at Missionary Ridge, okay? You don't always have a good field of fire. I will say that Dixon's preparations and dispositions were just terrible. He put very few people up there, put lots of people over there on the lower hill, and put no one up there. So if you wanted to hold it, it's baffling. What were you gonna? You have something to add? You look exasperated.
Well, the military crest was fine. The highest point.
Yeah. But there, even the military crest, you might be shooting straight down and you're shooting straight over everyone's head. And McLaws's force is simply a lot larger too. No matter where the New Yorkers up there could go, McLaws could go around him. He just couldn't stretch that whole way. So I blame Miles more than anybody else. Easy to blame a guy who died right at the end and didn't get to state his case. There was a court of inquiry about all of this because there were suggestions that Union soldiers actually killed Miles, that it wasn't a Confederate shell that came in because they hated this guy in a lot of ways. In fact, after he was wounded, apparently it was difficult to get somebody that would take him to cover. And they actually laid out blankets right there. He was not a liked guy. And if you've ever seen the movie Platoon, I mean, there are some people that will, in fact, take matters into their own hands. But the Court of Inquiry seems to support that he was shot by a Confederate artillery shell. Which one? Yeah. Yeah. Did you hear that? I'd rather attack this place 100 times than defend it once. It's indefensible.
That's what Jackson said in 1861 to leave.
Yeah, and that's why one of the reasons he left. That's right. Great point.
Hey, Gary.
Yes.
The military hasn't learned in federal top feeding in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It's a similar setup.
Yeah.
Ring by hills. If anybody's read the Adelman, three medal of honor in that action. But it was the same thing. A top fire base in the middle of mountains.
Yeah.
And
Bad idea.
just came over the mountains.
McClellan knew it. McClellan tried to get Miles to leave, tried to get Milroy or someone else to try to get Milroy to leave Winchester. Troops have a way of thinking, I can hold against all hell. And Miles thought that until he immediately decided, no, let's not fight, we'll give up. Many people suggested he was treasonous because he actually had, he let go a high-ranking Confederate, and then that cold, so he wasn't supposed to fight against the Union. And then a Yankee soldier went to Jackson and said, wait, we exchanged that guy. We didn't parole him. He wasn't properly exchanged. We just let him go on his own recognizance. And that led to, well, who's Miles talking to exactly? Does he have a mole in here? So it's fascinating. I suggest you read Chester Hearn's 6 Years of Hell, which is, we think Harpers Ferry, beautiful place. Living here sucked. From 1859 to 1865. It really did. And when it floods every time too, it still does. Okay? 6 Years of Hell is a really good title. This is not a happy place from 59 to 65. What?
He's gone.
Okay, anything else?
Don't stop.
Okay, so several options here. Okay? But our goal is, at least for some of us, to check out the beautiful view at the Hilltop House. By doing that, okay, great. Tim's fiance is very beautiful. Thank you for showing me that. Okay, yeah, we're decent on time. So, walk up Washington Street, okay? There are also